All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're unmasking Abaddon. This is honestly one of the most sensationalized and notoriously misunderstood figures in the entire biblical imagination. You know, if you've spent any time around the fringes of Western religious culture, you've definitely heard this name whispered in these hushed, apocalyptic tones. But the actual truth, the real story of how this figure evolved from ancient dusty texts all the way to end-of-the-world visions, it's so much more fascinating than any of the modern myths. Welcome to this explainer.
So I want you to think for a second. What terrifying image pops into your head when you hear the name Abaddon? For a lot of us, it immediately conjures up images of absolute, untethered chaos. But who is Abaddon, really? Well, to get to the truth of the source material, we actually have to start by dismantling what we've been conditioned to believe. Because, wow, it is fascinating just how much baggage has been piled onto this single name over the centuries. In pop culture and medieval lore, Abaddon is routinely pitched as this supreme demon lord, or maybe just a synonym for Satan or the Antichrist's right-hand man. Later occultists even went so far as to assign him specific planetary alignments and demonic ranks. And hey, if you've ever read John Bunyan's classic, The Pilgrim's Progress, you'll probably know Abaddon, translated there as Apollyon, as that terrifying winged demon that Christian has to fight for half a day. But pretty much all of these popular readings have a fatal flaw. They start at the very end of the biblical canon and then read backward through centuries of, frankly, wild speculation.
So, we need a paradigm shift. Right now, we're going to completely strip away that pop culture myth and all that medieval baggage. Instead, we are going to trace the actual, chronological, literary evolution of the biblical reality. Because when you track the ancient roots and look at the real lexical groundwork, the true story of Abaddon forms this brilliantly traceable arc. It's going to completely change how you view this destroyer.
Section 1. A place, not a person.
Let's de-escalate that apocalyptic energy for just a second and put on our historical detective hats. Because to understand where Abaddon ends up, we absolutely have to see where it begins. And it begins not as a who, but as a where. The name Abaddon comes directly from the Hebrew root abad, which simply means to perish or to destroy. When you put that into its intensive noun form, it translates to a literal, absolute place of destruction. What's so crucial to grasp here is that in the ancient Near East, neighboring cultures had these massive, sprawling mythologies full of underworld gods and monsters, like Nergal or Mot, but the Israelites purposefully rejected that. They didn't borrow a mythological monster, they created a purely functional term. Abaddon names the realm of the dead strictly by what it does. In fact, this term only appears 6 times. Just 6 times in the entire Hebrew Bible. And the really critical point is that all 6 of those occurrences are concentrated entirely within Israel's wisdom literature. We're talking books like Job, Proverbs, and the Psalms. In those ancient texts, it is consistently paired alongside Sheol. It's a location. It's a topographic destination for unrestrained destructive force. At this specific point in history, it is undeniably a place, not a personal being.
Section 2. When places become people.
So, languages and ideas evolve, right? How exactly does an ancient location transform into an entity? Well, it happens through one of the absolute most brilliant literary tools in ancient poetry, personification. Listen to this remarkable line from Job chapter 28. Abaddon and death say we have heard a rumor of it. I mean, this is a literary device called prosopopia, giving an abstraction a literal voice. In this passage, Job is surveying the entire cosmos, trying to find where wisdom lives, and the depths of the underworld actually speak up to confess their ignorance. The poetry here planted a massive conceptual seed. Once a realm can speak, hear, and testify, that boundary between an abstract location and a personal figure starts to get very, very thin. And this perfectly sets up the next step in that evolution, found in Proverbs 27:20. Sheol and Abaddon are never satisfied. By giving this place an insatiable hunger, the text gives it an appetite, and an appetite implies wanting. Wanting implies a will, and suddenly, almost without you noticing, this dark location is taking on the characteristics of a living, breathing entity. Because, this wasn't just an overnight change. This was a slow, centuries-long conceptual shift across the entire Second Temple period. It starts in the Hebrew Bible as a place of destruction, but as we move forward into the era of the Dead Sea Scrolls, texts start specifically naming an angel of the pit. Then, traditions like the Book of Enoch introduce the concept of a massive subterranean prison holding ancient supernatural beings. All of this incredible groundwork is being laid perfectly for the climax in the Book of Revelation, where Abaddon finally steps onto the stage as an angelic king. Section 3. The Map of the Underworld.
Before we jump straight to that grand finale in Revelation, we need to quickly orient ourselves. We have to understand the ancient map of the underworld so that the apocalyptic climax actually makes geographical sense. The ancient texts don't view the underworld as just one big empty cavern. It's a highly structured, layered descent. Step 1 is Sheol. That's the overarching broad realm of all the dead. Step 2, locked deep down within Sheol, is the abyss. This is a specific, secure prison compartment where certain supernatural beings are confined. And step 3 is Tartarus, the absolute deepest, darkest subcompartment of that prison. This highly specific geography is exactly where Abaddon's eventual domain sits.
Section 4. The Angel of the Abyss.
This brings us to the grand finale. The moment in Revelation chapter 9 where that conceptual shift from a place to a person reaches its full, terrifying apocalyptic expression. And right here, we hit the most logical question. It's the core mystery that pretty much everyone asks when they read Revelation 9. If there is a terrifying king of the abyss commanding all these destructive forces, is Abaddon actually just another name for Satan?
Well, the scholarly consensus, based strictly on the texts themselves, is no. They are definitely not the same. In the biblical texts, Satan is repeatedly described as a figure who roams freely, moving through the air and across the earth, seeking out whom he may devour. Abaddon, on the other hand, is a completely distinct, high-ranking official who is explicitly tied and confined to the absolute deepest prison of the abyss, waiting for a very specific eschatological release. Now, get this. Here is a totally fascinating historical twist. In Revelation 9, the author, John, provides the Greek translation for Abaddon, Apollyon. But why? Well, think about the first-century Roman Empire. Apollo was the patron god of imperial power and sovereignty. So by naming the eschatological destroyer Apollyon, John is actually making a subversive, anti-imperial jab. It's a coded message to his Greek-speaking audience, basically saying the Roman symbol of divine power, yeah, it's actually just a mere destroyer operating entirely under divine judgment.
And what about those terrifying composite locusts that Abaddon commands when the abyss is finally opened? Modern readers love to twist themselves into literal knots, trying to identify these things as, Apache helicopters or biological weapons. But if we actually stick to the source material of the Second Temple Jewish imagination, they are not military hardware, and they certainly aren't just big bugs. The ancient texts consistently identify the inhabitants imprisoned in the abyss as the fallen watchers from Genesis 6, these ancient, supernatural beings kept in chains of darkness awaiting their final release.
Section 5. The Leash on the Destroyer. To truly understand Abaddon, we have to return to the fundamental theological anchor of all this source material, because through all the terrifying imagery, there is one dominant motif we simply cannot ignore: the divine leash. Think back to this quote from Proverbs 15:11, "Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord." At every single stage of this literary evolution, from an abstract, dark place to a terrifying angelic king, this realm has always been utterly naked, transparent, and completely subordinate to God's omniscience. Abaddon has absolutely no secrets from the divine. And we see this structural leash so clearly in the climax of Revelation 9. Notice that Abaddon doesn't open the abyss himself. A good, divine angel holds the key. The torment released is strictly limited by God to exactly 5 months. The destructive forces literally cannot touch anyone who has God's seal. The ultimate proof of Abaddon's subordination is the fact that the so-called King of the Abyss doesn't even have the power to open his own cage. So the absolute crucial takeaway of this entire investigation is perfectly summarized right here. Abaddon is a destroyer. His capacity for destruction is very real and terrible. But he is not sovereign. His true identity does not testify to the autonomy of evil. Actually, scratch that. It proves the exact opposite. It proves the unassailable sovereignty of the God who completely governs chaos. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. If the ultimate apocalyptic destroyer, the terrifying angel of the abyss, is really just a warden on a divine leash, what does that actually reveal about the true nature of evil in the biblical imagination? I really hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity today and given you a totally fresh lens to read these ancient texts. Keep exploring the sources, and I'll see you in the next explainer.